Actually, if you want to turn off your video, then I meant to warn you about that. So if you do want to turn off, you don't have to turn off your video, but I am going to record just Fleda's reading so that we can post it for anyone who's not able to be here tonight. We're not going to be recording the open mic. So, but if you have an issue of being on camera as part of this piece of it only, please feel free to turn off your video, and then we will be delighted if you'll turn your video back on. We're going to be giving Fleda a spotlight on that. So as I said, I'm Kelly Dumar. Welcome to the Journal of Expressive Writing open mic, and with our feature here tonight, Fleda Brown. I will introduce her in just a minute. I'm going to introduce someone else who's really significant to the Journal of Expressive Writing tonight first. Just to say hello, we want to say hello to you, Jen Minotti, and I know you usually like to welcome everyone. And Jen is the founder of and the editor of the Journal of Expressive Writing, and a huge supporter of this wonderful open mic. So Jen, welcome.
Thank you, Kelly. Welcome, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here with you tonight. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief because we have so many talented writers to hear from, and I want to get to them as soon as possible. But I did want to take this opportunity to briefly say just a little bit about the journal. When I launched the Journal of Expressive Writing, it was 18 months ago. It was just 2 months after COVID shut down the country. I never imagined that I'd be here with all of you tonight in a monthly open mic. That was not anything that I imagined. And so to Kelly, I thank Kelly for bringing that inspiration to the journal. My inspiration for the journal came from listening, having the honor, really the supreme honor of listening to hundreds of amazing stories over the past 5 years in my women's writing circles. And during these circles, I watched as people wrote about all sorts of things: hurts, aspirations, regret, forgiveness, adversity. Sometimes when people were feeling really inspired, I had the privilege of listening to them as they wrote about their talents and their gifts. And those were incredibly magical moments, not just for them, but for me. And so I always left these circles feeling not only incredibly lucky that I got to witness people looking for their voices, but I saw them find their voices. And then not only find their voices, I saw them generously and fearlessly sharing their voices with the rest of the people in the circle. And so I just knew, I had been thinking about this for a long time, that I wanted the world to hear these stories because they were incredible. And often in just 5 or 10 minutes of writing from a single prompt, what came out of that writing of that time was just truly remarkable. So I felt that these stories needed to be shared with the world, and especially at that time during COVID, when COVID first hit, when we were all disconnected, literally and figuratively. So the open mic piece, this is all Kelly's doing. Nothing I ever imagined. And yet when I look back, I can see how this is the perfect next step. Open mic actually gives voice to the stories and to the written word that we're seeing on the page and on the internet, and it connects us on a whole new level. So once again, I want to thank Kelly Dumar for bringing this incredible and really important component to the Journal of Expressive Writing. I want to thank Katerina. She's here tonight providing her technical help and expertise. Thank you so much, Fleda, for joining us tonight as our featured writer. We're so grateful to have you here for giving us your time. Thank you in advance to our 15 readers who are going to be courageously sharing their work with us tonight. And most importantly, I want to thank everyone here who's listening in the audience, because words need an audience. And I'm so grateful that you're here tonight as generous and appreciative listeners. So back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Jen. I want to go over one more time quickly that if you're signed up to read, you should look in the chat room. My helper, Katarina Konin, is going to be putting the list of readers in the order that you're going to read. And it's really important that your name on the screen match the name you signed up to read under, so that she can keep track of who is here and who is not here. And if you do have any question about the reading list, please send it to Katarina or myself, but Katarina may get to it more quickly than I would. And I just want to remind you all that we do ask for 3 minutes total. Poetry, prose, whatever you want to read is your choice. But the 3 minutes, I do time it, and it does include any introductory remarks that you want to make. So I would suggest keeping those to a minimum. And it's really helpful if you time yourself before you come, just so you know. I am going to have to cut you off if you do go over 3 minutes, and I hate to cut people off, but I will do it. And it doesn't mean that I don't want to hear, or that none of us want to hear what you have to say. You're always welcome to come back. So please never take it personally. And I want to say that we're going to go in this order. I'm going to introduce Fleda in just a second. I'm going to have Fleda's going to read to us from her book, Mortality with Friends. And then if you have any questions as you're listening to Fleda, please feel free to put them in the chat room, and I will be looking at those questions. And then we're going to chat with Fleda a little bit after she does her reading, and then we're going to go directly into the open mic. So right now, I'm going to introduce, you know what, there was one thing I wanted to do first, actually, which I always really like to do. So let me just do that. I just remembered as I looked at my page. I want us to be thinking about sunlight. For most of us, it's evening right now, but wherever you are, I do want you to be thinking about how we are all under the same beam of sun today. I want to read a poem by Tony Hoagland to sort of open our time together tonight. It's called The Word. Down near the bottom of the crossed out list of things you have to do today, between green thread and broccoli, you find that you have penciled sunlight. Resting on the page, the word is beautiful. It touches you as if you had a friend, and sunlight were a present he had sent from someplace distant at this morning to cheer you up and to remind you that among your duties, pleasure is a thing that also needs accomplishing. Do you remember that time and light are kinds of love, and love is no less practical than a coffee grinder or a safe spare tire? Tomorrow you may be utterly without a clue, but today you get a telegram from the heart in exile, proclaiming that the kingdom still exists, the king and queen alive, still speaking to their children, to anyone among them who can find the time to sit out in the sun and listen. So as we sit out in the sun and listen tonight, I do want to introduce Fleda Brown, who is here to read to us tonight from her third collection of memoir essays, Mortality with Friends, which was published by Wayne State University Press this fall. Growing Old in Poetry, Two Poets, Two Lives is a collection of essays with Vermont Poet Laureate Sidney Lee. That came out in 2013 from Green Writers Press. And Driving with Dvorak was published in 2010 by the University of Nebraska Press. Her essays have won the New Letters and the Ohio State University The Journal Awards for creative nonfiction. Her 10th collection of poems, Flying Through a Hole in the Storm, 2021, won the Hollis Summers Prize from Ohio University Press. Fleda has won the Felix Pollock Prize, a Pushcart Prize, the Philip Levine Prize, and the Great Lakes College's New Writers Award. And she's been twice a finalist for the National Poetry Series. She's a professor emerita at the University of Delaware, where she taught for 27 years. She was Poet Laureate of Delaware, 2001 to 2007. She now lives with her husband, Jerry Beasley, in Traverse City, Michigan. So let me tell you a little bit about Mortality with Friends. It's a collection of lyrical essays, and they're Fleda's from being a writer and a caretaker of her father, and sometimes her husband, who lives with the nagging uneasiness that her cancer could return. Memoir in Field, the book muses on the nature of art, of sculpture, of the loss of bees and trees, the end of marriages, and, among other things, the loss of hearing and of life itself. Containing 22 essays, Mortality with Friends follows the cascade of loss with the author's imminent joy in opening a path to track her own growing awareness and wisdom. Welcome, Fleda.
Thank you, Kelly. It's really, I'm very happy to read for this journal, excuse me, which I'm happy to be introduced to, actually. It's just sort of new on the screen, and so I'm happy to know it's there. I thought a long time about what to read. I've read several times from this collection, and so I didn't want to repeat in case there are people who have heard me read before. This is a collection of essays over 10 years. I just kept writing and publishing one by one. And then at some point I saw, okay, it looks like I ought to be able to put these together. And it was kind of, it's not easy to figure out how to put it together. So what I ended up doing, because the essays are over a long period of time, is I gave some of the essays dates, because particularly the ones about my father's aging and death, the early ones, he's in his early 90s, and the last ones he's 100 and then he's dying. And so I didn't want you to jump into the collection without knowing where you were or why. So what I decided is I want to read one shortish essay that comes at the beginning, and then I want to read a lot of the final essay, not the whole thing. I tried really hard to cut it down so that it would work. So this essay is called Mildred, and I don't think it's not very long, and I don't think it needs any real explanation. When she comes to the water, we don't see her. We see her when she goes in. We hear the splashing. We see the paw prints, the 5 long claws. She lives under the cottage in our life's shadow. We see where she enters. With our elusive and complicated brains, we decide to make her stand for what was there before we were. She is probably not the same raccoon. They live only 1 to 3 years. We give her an imagined continuity. We name her Mildred after Mildred Osborne, the now deceased next door neighbor, for no reason other than to keep the Osbornes around a while longer, although the new people knew for the last 10 years are better neighbors. That is, they take the kids out on their jet skis and motorboat, neither of which we own. Mildred decides to have babies upstairs in our cottage crawl space. John, the carpenter remodeling our kitchen, says he hears scuttling and shuffling above his head. Our other neighbor, Lou, says we should set a trap to catch Mildred and drown her. There are too many Mildreds getting into trash buckets, he says. John says we ought to get poison or something, or shoot her. I think maybe my sensitivity is too precious for their older world. I think of my father and his brother out with their shotguns, killing crows, squirrels, anything that came along, as if the world would last forever. I call the SPCA. The young woman tells me they can't come get a raccoon. She tells me to soak a rag in ammonia and to play loud music near the crawl space to drive her out. I forgot to say, Mildred got into the cottage by crawling down the chimney and then up the stairs. I think I will drive her out, then crawl in and get her babies, put them in a box, and take them to a place where she can move them elsewhere. I soak the rag and set it just inside the crawl space. I can see nothing in there in the dark. I get my little red radio and tune in the loudest music, which turns out to be Christian rock. All night in my sleep or semi-sleep, the Christians are letting me know they are here and up to date. The morning mist is rising, and there is Mildred pacing the roof of the cottage. She sees me. I imagine she sees me, although raccoons have very poor distance vision. Maybe she senses me. We look in at each other's direction for a long minute, two mothers. We know each other. We know nothing of each other. I continue with my plan. I block the opening to the fireplace. I get a cardboard box. I go upstairs and open the crawl space. It's dark in there. There is loud scuffling and hissing and miniature growling beyond the range of my flashlight. I don't know how old the babies are. They may be almost ready to leave the nest. They may have grown very sharp claws and teeth. I back out of the crawl space. I take the ammonia-soaked rag with me. I have already turned off the music, which was still blasting in Jesus's name. I go downstairs and remove the piece of steel that we use to close up the fireplace in winter. I set aside the bucket I used to hold it tight against the fireplace opening. I go back out in the woods and watch the roof where Mildred is still pacing. I tell her without speaking that I give up. She lumbers to the chimney and slowly lowers herself. I do not know how she knows, except for maybe the draft of air rising now. When she is all the way in the chimney, she stops and looks at me again before she lowers herself out of sight. Well, that's Mildred. And as I said, I have no idea how many Mildreds there are. We just assume it's all the same Mildred. The last essay in the book, and you'll find in this book that there are a lot of references to Virginia Woolf. This one is called, this was from 2019. This is one of the ones with dates, and it's called Becoming Mrs. Ramsey. I'm referring over and over to her novel, To the Lighthouse. My phone says it's 1 degree outside and -2 at the cottages an hour north of here. The snow must be waist high there, the lake frozen solid and dotted with ice houses for fishing. The little town of Central Lake will be scraping through another winter. Bachman's General Store, if we don't have it, you don't need it, selling a few dish towels and heating pads until summer, when the children will stand before the wide wooden tray of candy that used to cost a penny each to choose the number of pieces their parents allow. And while they're at it, bargain for a bag of plastic insects or dinosaurs. Adults will buy another iteration of the Central Lake logo sweatshirt or hat. I used to fear that Central Lake, grown by logging and shrinking by lack of it, would die entirely, but it hangs on. Bachman's store still in the family, run by Mike Bachman's niece after he retired, and before that by his father. And the village market, formerly Central Foods, is now stocking enough variety to make it possible to mostly shop there instead of driving to Bel Air. There are 2 car repair shops, a nice library, at Madame Adams Boutique, and the large Blue Pelican restaurant that used to be the Lamplight Inn. There's still several rooms to rent upstairs. My nephew Kevin rented one for himself, his wife, and his son Benjamin when the cottage was too full. He went downstairs at night to ask a question and discovered that the place was entirely dark, no one in the whole building except them. He was so unnerved that the 3 of them slept huddled in the same bed for the rest of the night. We've been planning to drive up and paint a few swatches of color on the wall of the little cottage, to choose one, but it's too cold. The polar vortex has held us most of the winter, submerged in cold and snow, our own North Pole. I want to get this paint job. I want to get to this paint job. I'm always eager to do anything that involves the cottages. I should say, last year was the first time I realized I was Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Ramsey. I was picking up fallen branches around the old cottage, painting the green edge of the porch trim to save it one more year from rot. And I thought, yes, I've become the spirit of the place. The comings and goings revolve now around me. And when I die, the children and grandchildren will stand on the end of the dock, looking toward town, then south to the wide part of the lake, not looking for anything, but recalibrating. I am standing at the corner of the porch, no, just off the porch to the north side. The cedars that have since been cut down when they threatened the porch are still there, their trunks still thin. My angle of vision is low because I am 9 years old. Old Zip Pixler, as she was called, is standing so that she's between the shining lake and me. She is still wearing her apron. She has walked down their steep hill to say that nothing will be the same with Brownie gone. My grandmother, my father's mother, who has come to my eyes now in place of Zip Pixler, long hair caught up, but coming loose and blowing, even though she had it bobbed years before she died. She is standing on the little bit of broken sidewalk between the cottage and the lake, looking out as she did, watching for my father, who has sailed so far out of sight he won't be back in time for supper. Wolf would have put a lighthouse out there, something visible to yearn toward, instead of the blank lake after the sailboat has rounded the point. I'd better talk about my grandmother before she fades entirely. She was not beautiful. She had an English receding chin like Eleanor Roosevelt, but she was not unbeautiful. She was tall and slim. She bent to wash or to pick up a dish towel with a self-possession, a grace. I can almost hear her voice, but it is mingled with the others now. She had only a high school education, but she took her husband's economics classes, read his books and many others, and in the way of her generation, taught herself with no thought for degrees. There's a photo of her and my grandfather after some lecture he's given. She's stylishly dressed, brooch at her lapel, confident for all the world his equal. In the distortion of angle, memory coming from my young self and what I set in place of it these years later, objects grow wavy, unsure. The dross of exactness has fallen away, and what's left has mingled with the emotion pulled along with it and have become a private emblem. I have become an emblem. I have become all that is imagined about me. Unlike Mrs. Ramsey, I have written and written my life, but I'm sure that when the children and grandchildren think of the lake, they put me not at the computer, but walking across on the leaf path from the little green cottage to the big old cottage, or sitting on the dock in my tan floppy hat. And I am not myself, but symbolic of the lake, of grandmother, the link to various private memories. There's no one else anymore. Uncle Richmond, who lives down the lake, is forgetting. My father is gone. Someone must step into place, or the structure will begin to give way. Small ruptures, then nothing but banging shutters, mouse droppings. I see Mrs. Ramsey's shawl wrapped around the boar's head skull on the wall because her son James is afraid of the shadow at night. That one emblem of her nurturing, the way the shawl falls loose in the breeze through a window left slightly open for years. That stays with me like my grandmother's black wool swimsuit on the nail in the back bedroom. This is the summer we will scatter my father's ashes, which at the moment are sitting in a large tin in the back of my closet. His ashes, my Aunt Cleone's and my grandmother's, will be for eternity in the lake and on the earth around the cottage. Eternity, as they say, eternity, the noun that stands for forever, yet the movement has never stopped. Still, we draw a line, we'll take note, we create a moment when the idea of cottage changes generations, when nothing is the same, as we say, meaning nothing has ever been the same. Mrs. Ramsey's death happens in one parenthetical note, sudden, over. How strange it is. My father had been typing a letter, joking with Judy, his favorite staff person, that morning. He called to ask how I was feeling after my minor surgery. That evening, one of the aides called me to say he wasn't feeling well. I called him. His breathing sounded awful. He said he'd been in terrible pain all afternoon. He's such a hypochondriac. So I asked, how are you right now, this minute? Maybe a little better, he said. I told him to ask for a couple of Tylenols and that I'd call the nurse in the morning. But I didn't like the way he sounded, heavy, gasping. Jerry volunteered to check on him. Almost as soon as Jerry walked in the room, my father died. He was still warm when I got there, unusually pale, still himself, but he was gone. Who he was had left somehow, some way, through the same mysterious portal that a human enters the world, from the joining of the egg and sperm to a kicking, squalling consciousness, not gone, but departed. Not departed, but a cataclysmic shift. I rubbed his arm. I smoothed his steely gray and still thick hair. I was looking for him, but he had shifted. I was trying to tell him that I loved him in spite of everything and because of everything, that I remember our lives, all of it, that I had meant to say all that, to say that something had held me back from it. But now, quickly, please, I could say it. In a photo, I am at the head of the table on the screened-in porch because it's my 70th birthday and I have so far survived cancer. My hair is growing in wildly curly and I'm experimenting with color. I look not at all like myself to myself. Everyone is there, Kelly and her family of 5, Scott and his family of 4, Uncle Dick and Aunt Lee, Jerry. They go around the table to say wonderful things about me. I have survived. I hear their voices, but the words are only resonances, their faces dark against the setting sun. Evening is like that there, light sliding slowly under the trees, scooping up the grass, the rocks on shore, the stilled lake. At dinner time, an intense orange comes to us so that the one at the head of the table, which is me, is unable to see. It is all silhouette, or I am unable to see because of my tears. Virginia Woolf imagined Mrs. Ramsey as the nurturer and matchmaker whose natural movement was to sweep together the disparate elements of her life. What if she wasn't sweeping together, but simply holding the place they set for her? She is at the head of the table because each of the 8 children, plus Mr. Ramsey and the artist, the poet, the botanist, the philosopher, and 2 other friends, cry out for a head of table, for a prow of the boat, an emblem, a way to think about themselves in relation. In relation, people want a cottage, a grandmother, a father, a mother, the comfort of seeing themselves inside of, beside, taking orders from, rebelling against, modeling themselves after. When it's warm in the spring, my father's daughters will drive to Central Lake, pass Bachman's store, turn left at the village market, cross over the town bridge and head for the cottage, as we have done so many times. They are like one time, to say goodbye, to scatter his ashes. If we all have our memories, all different, crisscrossing at points, then who was he? His body, tangible for 100 years, was always changing. Yet tangible is only an idea based on the distance between observer and observed. To think solid, you have to back off. You have to put together a lot of ideas and images on your own to come up with the person who sits at the head of the table, the crown jewel, as my nephew David likes to call him. That's David's idea, not mine. There is so much complexity that to assert anything at all is basically a lie, a necessary one, but still. My nephew Kevin is sure there were ghosts in that long night at the Blue Pelican Inn. I think he's been at the cottage too rarely to have met the ones who live there. I would introduce him, but it doesn't work like that. The ghosts are private, singular. They rise at an intersection that you had to be there for, come into view, and then sink to a transparency. That doesn't mean they aren't there. Thank you.
Thank you, Fleda. Beautiful. I know there are a lot of comments going on in the chat room, and
oh, there sure are. There 50, something like that.
Yeah. So you'll have a chance to read those. And I can always send you the copy of the text. Have you ever tried to imagine what your family would be like without the cottages?
I honestly, yeah, I guess I have thought about that. I don't think it would hold together in the same way. As I said at the end of that essay, you kind of have to have a point. You know, a lot of people, it might be their family, it might be their parents' house, that as long as the parents are alive, they all go there. And then when the parents are not alive, things just kind of disperse and it's never quite the same again. So I'm very, very grateful for the cottage. And I've talked to a lot of people who have cottages who around here, there are a lot of people who have cottages, and they all feel the same way, that it's just the hub of the family.
Yeah, yeah, that comes across so strongly. I'm really glad you chose to read from tonight. Well, from both Mildred and Mrs. Ramsey, Becoming Mrs. Ramsey. It's Mrs. Ramsey that's quoted in your trailer. It's your essay that's quoted in your trailer, which is just like, it's beautiful. And a lot can be done in the trailer, but it really grabbed me, this whole idea of becoming an emblem and just being at the stage and place in your life where you are aware of all this meaning that, and the other things that people imagine you to be. You stand for so many significant things, grandmother and mother, and it's really, really very moving and touching. And so I just really want to tell you, I really appreciate what you've brought into words by that you've become a spirit of the place. And so one of the questions, I know there's some questions in the chat room, and please feel free. I noticed one and I will get to it, but put another comment or two, question if you have them for Fleda in the chat room. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you for, I mean, this is the Journal of Expressive Writing. So we believe, I'm not speaking for the journal, but I know that Jen believes this, and I think we share this idea about writing being naturally therapeutic and very healing, and a place to go to attend to yourself, to express what you need to express, to have catharsis, to have a way of maybe being your own best friend, to be that ideal listener. So this is what you've done here in crafting this beautiful book, is written all these different essays. And I'm just curious about whether you think about this topic. Is your writing therapeutic? Is putting together a book of essays like this? So I understand these are not first drafts. This is not cathartic writing. You just put it in your journal to feel better. But I'm just curious if you might comment a little bit about your own healing process and how that relates to the crafting of these essays.
You know, I suppose that there isn't anybody who writes anything that isn't prompted at the beginning by some discomfort. And the discomfort is likely to come from, relationships or whatever, some kind of difficulty someplace. I very seldom does anybody sit down and say, I think I'll just write about butterflies and I'll be all happy. There's a discomfort. And I think you're absolutely right, Kelly, that after a great deal of revision, it's not what it might have started out to be. And most of us who've been writing for a long time can certainly tell the difference between writing that is polished to the point. I mean, writing that's become art and writing that hasn't yet become art. So I don't know what to say, except that I think that every essay in here is prompted by some kind of discomfort, I'm sure. Yeah, but take that last essay, for example.
Yes.
I was prompted by, I'd been reading Virginia Woolf from beginning to end, and I was just so aware all of a sudden of how in relation to the cottage and in relation to her place, I was just the symbolic figure. And that, that means doesn't mean I'm the queen of the roost. It just means that people have all kinds of ideas about me.
Did that surprise you to realize that's your role? Is it right?
Well, I think when you get to be a certain age, you know that, you just, that's the way it is. And it's fine. I mean, it's the way things are. It's the way life is. You can't, what's real is not that easily explained.
You have titled this book after, I believe it's after the essay, Mortality with Friends.
Right.
Which, and so I'm just curious if you say a little bit about where the title for that essay came from. So what that essay includes is some personal responses around the cancer, I believe, to that you include in the essay with your own. But I imagine that the Mortality with Friends title of the book maybe you expanded on that idea.
Yeah, when I came across that title for that essay, I was so, once in a while something happens that makes me really excited, and I thought, this is perfect. Because that particular essay, I use quotations from other people who've had cancer and how they're dealing with that. And I just intersperse those with my own comments, with my own thoughts about it. And so there was the essay, and then I put the book together, and I just thought, well, this whole darn book is Mortality with Friends. The death of the aging and the death of my father, it just goes on and on. And
Mildred, does Mildred count as a friend?
Does Mildred count? What's the part? I don't know. I hope somewhere she's in a Mildred heaven.
Well, it seems like you really approached her as a kind of a friend, certainly. Fabulous essay about just making, that awareness of these other presences, that we don't live in our houses alone by any means, even if we have family there. Those other creatures that maybe it's her house, Mildred's house. So it was really.
Well, it is. You see, that's the problem. We're only there for the summer. And these creatures, it really is their house, and we just intrude for the summer. Not just Mildred, but the mice and the granddaddy longlegs, and that it's their house. We just barge in and take over for a while.
And Andrea gives us a wonderful moment of serendipity in the chat room, which I'll bring to your attention. She just happened to have finished rereading Mrs. Dalloway this afternoon. And so now you're bringing her Mrs. Ramsey to me in the essay. So other lovers of Virginia are here.
Hi, Andrea. It's so great to see you.
And there was a question in the chat room a little bit of the ways back that had to do with writing about your family and people that you know. Okay, Adriana was asking, Fleda, how does knowing your loved ones will read what you write, sometimes about them, influence your writing?
Oh, good question. Actually, my first collection of essays, my first memoir, there was one that I don't think I had learned quite as much kindness in that first book. And I had written I'd written a number of things that when my friend Judith Kitchen was reading it, and she was sort of helping me think about how to put it together as a book, she said, you leave all of this, you leave it, it's wonderful. And finally I said, no, I pulled out chunks because I felt they'd be hurtful. And I'm not sorry, it didn't hurt the essay, I don't think. It just, it's just a matter of, you want to tell the truth. You always want to tell the truth. You want to tell the truth as you know it, as you feel it, but you don't have to necessarily be nasty to tell the truth. And you also, the truth is complex. To think that there's one dark truth or one light truth or whatever is distorting the picture. If, when you write about somebody, like writing about my father, he was absolutely wonderful and he was absolutely horrible, and that's life. you know, and I try to give all of that so that you don't come away thinking, what a terrible man or what a wonderful man, you know.
And so there's a quote from the Mortality with Friends essay that I wanted to mention, because sure, you write, sure, we all started living with death when we were born. It was in us, but we were climbing uphill toward our full height, our lovely arms and legs, our desire finding itself, our intellect full of surprises. Death was in us, but had nothing to say until it did. Then life began to glow with what you might call a gorgeous sunset light. How beautifully clothed the ending can be, unless it isn't. So I love how you give us this beautiful, beautiful lyrical explanation of this possible gorgeous experience at death. But then I'm curious about what you mean by unless it isn't.
Well, not all death ends beautifully. Not all life ends beautifully. Sometimes it's perfectly awful. You know, it just, if you've ever been with somebody who's dying, when it's not an easy death or a good death, you understand that it may be a beautiful sunset glow, and then again, it may be extremely difficult. So that's what I meant.
Yeah, I just want to mention for those of you who don't have the book, please get it. I will put the link in the chat room again. And yes, thanks for holding up the cover, because it's beautiful, and there is such a variety of essays drawn around this theme, and I think you'll really want to read all of them. And Mortality with Friends really goes, I think, very deeper into perhaps than the two you read tonight around this issues of wrestling with your own mortality in a way. So is there one last question? I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. And I just really want to say thank you so much for reading these two beautiful essays to us, and for being here and sharing. And I will look forward to having you here with us during this next piece of hearing our open mic readers. And thank you. Thank you, Fleda.
And my pleasure. I did
want to, I'm sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
I just wanted to say at the very beginning, I mentioned right up here, it's the very first of the chats. If you are interested in getting my once every 2 weeks blog, you just email me at bfleda@gmail.com and tell me you want to sign up for it. You can't sign up on the site. I have to sign you up. So it's bfleda@gmail.com.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That was actually what I just remembered I wanted to mention. It's really worth receiving. I encourage you all. I read Fleda's blog on a regular basis, and you've been doing it for how many years?
Oh gosh, I'd say, let's see, we've lived here. I'd say I've been doing it 10 years.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Before it was my wobbly bicycle. I just named it that when I got cancer, and it seemed like I said something in an essay about cancer being like, I mean, life being like riding a wobbly bicycle. You never know when you might fall over. So that's where it came from.
These beautiful narrative, weekly, very process oriented, and a lot of nuggets and beautiful things about your life that are in there that relate to all of us, and a lot of things about poetry, craft, and writing. So I hope you will all consider also reading and staying in touch with Fleda by signing up for My Wobbly Bicycle. So thank you, Fleda. We'll switch over now to the open mic, and Katarina has very kindly, I'm going to stop the recording.